Mr. Bezan, seconded by Mr. Rajat, moves that Bill C-478, an act to amend the criminal code increasing parole ineligibility, be now read a second time and referred to the Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights. Debate. The Honourable Member for Selkirk-Kinderley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it is indeed a pleasure for me to be able to rise for this first hour of debate on my private member's bill, Bill C-478, which is a bill that I've titled the Respecting Families of Murdered and Brutalized Persons Act. I want to thank earlier today the Minister of Justice and the Prime Minister for throwing their support behind my private member's bill. I also want to thank Senator Beausoleil from the other place for his support of this legislation, and also for his incredible work that he has done when he founded the Association for Families of Murdered and Missing People. What Bill C-478 is focused at doing is amending the criminal code. Section 475 lays out a number of different codes for sentencing for a number of different felonies. And what we are doing is going to create a new section under 7445 that would really concentrate on individuals who have committed the three following crimes together: the abduction, the sexual assault, and the murder of an individual. And what we're proposing is that rather than the one sentence of a maximum life sentence of 25 years without parole, that we give the discretionary power to the courts to look at increasing that ineligibility up to a maximum of 40 years. Now, this is about empowering the courts. This is about giving another tool to the judge and to the jury to look at ways to evaluate individual cases. And I think because we are targeting looking at providing discretionary power to the courts and not mandatory minimums, that we are actually going to be compliant with Section 12 of the Charter. So the judge, when determining the parole and eligibility period, has to take into regard the character of the offender, the nature of the offenses, and the circumstances surrounding their commission. So a judge could task the jury to make a recommendation back to the judge in sentencing on what type of parole and eligibility they wish to provide for these individuals. And that is, again, from a maximum of today is at 25 years, that they now can go from 25 years all the way to 40 years. If the person is charged and convicted of first-degree murder in association with the other acts of kidnapping and rape. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that this is a very important issue that really strikes at home of what Canadians expect of this government. And my private member's bill, C-478, follows in suit with and been modeled after Bill C-48, which was the government's bill on protecting the Canadians by ending sentence discounts for multiple murders, and Bill S-6, which is the act for serious time for the most serious crimes. So, again, it is providing a tool to the courts. It's empowering the judges and juries to make stronger sentencing, and it's about going after the worst of society. We're talking about the Robert Pictons of the world, the Paul Bernardos, Russell Williams, Michael Rafferty, Terry Lynn McClintock, Clifford Olson, Donald Armstrong, James Dobson, David Shearing, and even Luca Magnotta, who's in the system right now. These are the most depraved individuals, and one that I think all society really finds repulsive. These sadistic murderers are the ones that go out and snatch up our children, our loved ones, and then go and do their sexually depraved acts upon their victims, and then sadistically murder them. A true brutalization of these individuals. One of the worst ones that we came across is David Theron, who was sentenced to life in prison back in 1975. At the time, and I'd like to quote Justice Hughes, who was the judge at the time, stated in regards to Theron that he should never again be on the streets and roadway of our country. That this individual was so depraved that the judge at the time, taking in consideration his character and the gravity of the crimes that he had committed, should never, ever be paroled. And all the research that we've done, that my office has contacted the Library of Parliament, we have contacted people who are experts in the criminal justice system, we could not find one example where these type of sadistic murderers ever are paroled. Clifford Olson died in prison. These individuals are not being released back into society. But yet they've had tools at their disposal, being parole board hearings, where they can re-victimize the families. They can go and ask for a parole hearing at year 10 if they're a second-degree murder. Robert Picton was only charged with second-degree murder on 25 counts. So he can, at 10 years, be eligible for making a parole hearing. So what we want to do is make sure that doesn't happen. So now the judges can say, even if they're charged with second-degree murder, not first-degree murder, that they can put a more stringent timeline before they can start making parole applications. Now, Mr. Speaker, just a few years ago, I think a lot of Canada, including myself, was gripped with the Tory Stafford case. And it broke everyone's hearts to see how this little girl was caught on camera being abducted from school, and then later found that she had been sexually assaulted by Michael Rafferty and Terry Lynn McClintock, and then was brutally murdered with a hammer. In 2010, Terry Lynn McClintock was sentenced to life in prison. At about the same time, it also came to light that Russell Williams, former member of the Canadian Forces, was also arrested and sentenced at the end of 2010 in October for the murder of Jessica Lloyd and Marie France Como. Again, were abducted, raped, and then murdered. And then during that time, as Michael Rafferty was still in the court system, Clifford Olson was dying of cancer in jail. And it had been weighing on my mind, and in listening to the talk shows, how can we keep these very gruesome individuals from being released back into society where they can really, again, have the opportunity to reoffend. When I heard the story of Sharon Rosenfeld, her husband Gary, and their son Darren, and in listening to how their family was tormented by Olson, along with the other 10 families who had also lost loved ones to this monster, I think is the only way you could describe Clifford Olson. And he would write to them when they were getting ready to attend parole board hearings about how he not only abducted and raped over and over again their children, but how he tortured them and the way he killed them. And I think that all Canadians were repulsed by that recount and by those crimes. So I started looking into how do we save the families from having to go before the parole board every time one of these individuals can apply for parole. Olson did it under the Feign Hope Clause at year 15, and then starting at year 23, he was allowed to again reapply every 2 years. And he would write to the families, and they would be forced to put together all their victim impact statements and then appear at the parole board hearing and restate and relive that traumatic and terrible event of being, informed that their child had been murdered brutally. So this bill is about ending the re-victimization of the families, Mr. Speaker. This bill will end the ability of those sadistic individuals who are incarcerated from using parole hearings to toy, to terrorize, and brutalize the families over and over again. The potential is that if Bill C-478 becomes law, and if a judge and jury make the decision to apply the maximum sentence of 40 years without parole, is that it would save the families 8 parole board hearings over that time. 8 times of having to go before the parole board, facing the individual who murdered their loved one, having to relive the horrific events that occurred in the past. And really, this is about respecting their rights as victims. This bill isn't about tougher punishments, because all the research, and I have to restate this, all the research is showing that these individuals are never released back into society. They're incarcerated for life. Parole boards are over and over again denying them the ability to go back into society. These individuals are not rehabilitating. These individuals, I've been sitting and reading through victim impact statements from a number of the families that I've been in contact with. And one family even shared with me an email from another convict who was incarcerated at the same time and in the same facility as the murderer of their child. And he wrote and said, this individual, despite the facade that he's putting on, should never be released into society, to do everything that they could to ensure that he stayed in prison. Mr. Speaker, this bill is about the families of the victims, like Linda Bright, Janet and Karen Johnson, Darlene Priorello, and Sharon Rosenfeld's son, Darren. Linda Bright was only 16 years old when she was abducted by Donald Armstrong in Kingston back in 1978. He's applied for parole on numerous occasions, including just recently in March of last year. Linda's sister, Susan Ashley, made this statement. She says, "It breaks my heart having to live through this again. My heart breaks having to watch my mom and dad drag up their thoughts and pain from that deep place inside them where they tuck their hurt away." Linda's mother, Margaret Bright, said, "This is not fair. We should not have to relive our tragedy. When I remember my daughter, let me remember her as a little girl. Don't make me think about that awful time in 1978. Let me tell you, this has been the most difficult thing I've had to do in the last 20 years. Sharon Rosenfeld this morning, who's been very active with the National Victims of Crime organization, attended our press conference with Minister of Justice and Senator Beausoleil. And, she was what really drove me to this point, hearing her on the radio, driving around in the riding to Manitoba. And so I really appreciate that she has been such a powerful advocate. Well, her son Darren was only 16, and again was a victim, one of 11, of Clifford Olson. And they had to go through the Faint Hope Clause hearing back in 1997, and parole hearings in 2006 and 2010. And every time he was denied parole. Well, her past husband Gary said that what's really horrendous about this is this is only the beginning. We're going to have to do this every 2 years as long as Olson lives. And this is a very, very painful experience for myself and my family. And Sharon said, attending parole hearings every 2 years or 5 years after the offender has served 25 years is cruel and unusual punishment for the victims' families. And Terry Priorello, when talking about her sister Darlene, who was killed at 16 years of age back in 1982, said, families have already been victimized once. They shouldn't have to be victimized every 2 years. Having to face a loved one's killer and to read what he did to her and how her death has affected our lives is something nobody should ever have to do once, never mind twice. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask members of this House to support my bill and really respect the rights of the victims whose children have been so brutally murdered by these horrendous characters.
Here, here.
Question commentée, l'honorable député de Gatineau.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et je remercie le collègue de Selkirk-Interlake pour son projet de loi. Je pense que ça nous permet de discuter de la question des victimes, parce qu'il y a effectivement, avec chaque crime, il y a souvent pas seulement une, mais plusieurs victimes. Ceci étant dit, là où j'en ai un petit peu avec le projet de loi du collègue, c'est qu'il laisse sous-entendre aux gens qui nous écoutent, Monsieur le Président, que ça réglerait cette problématique-là pour toutes les personnes qu'il a mentionnées, alors que son projet de loi, d'une part, rend le facteur de 25 à 40 ans. Premièrement, c'est un step, c'est pas passer de 25 à 40, ça peut être n'importe où à l'intérieur de ça. Ça peut être encore 25 ans aussi, c'est vraiment laissé à la cour, c'est laissé au juge. Le jury peut recommander quelque chose, puis le juge peut faire autre chose. Alors, comment peut-il certifier en cette Chambre qu'effectivement, ça va faire en sorte que les personnes, les victimes dont il a parlé, vont avoir à ne pas se présenter à tous les 2 ans, alors qu'il n'y a absolument aucune garantie de se faire? Et dernière question rapidement, est-ce qu'il a consulté des gens au ministère de la Justice pour vérifier la compatibilité avec la Charte canadienne des droits, la section 12 en particulier, et la section 11 de la Convention de Rome? Merci.
The honourable member for Selkirk-Interlake.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do thank the member for her questions and her role as the critic for justice. And, we did talk to the Department of Justice as I was drafting this, and we went back and forth a number of times on trying to find the right wording. I've worked exclusively with the Library of Parliament in drafting to ensure that we were compliant with Section 12. I didn't want to bring a bill forward that was going to fail that test. It would be a waste of this House's time. It'd be a waste of my one and only space that I have to bring forward private members' business if we didn't proceed in a way that was compliant, but still made a difference. So I am confident that because we are giving the powers to the courts, that it isn't being legislated as a mandatory minimum, that we are compliant with the Act. It allows for discretion. The judge, and under the recommendation of a jury or not, will have the ability to set sentencing beyond 25 years. It still allows them to weigh in all the other matters of the case. So it isn't tied in directly, and I hope that the NDP will be able to look at this, realize that we're talking about a very small number of offenders who are going to be incarcerated in the future, and that this is about protecting the families of having to relive horrific experiences of being at parole.
Yeah.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do appreciate the comments that the member has brought forward, and to pick up on the word horrific. And I think it's an excellent word to describe what it is that this bill is attempting to do in the minds of a vast majority of Canadians. When they hear of stories of which he's conveyed, I think that's a fairly appropriate word to be using. And so I'm pleased in terms of what it is that I'm hearing from the member, especially given the fact that you're allowing the judge to use it as a discretionary authority, and as such feel comfortable in supporting what it is that the member is brought to the House today. My question is the member looking at any, or does he have in mind any type of amendments that he sees coming, or is he fairly confident of the bill itself?
The honourable member for Selkirk-Interlake.
I want to thank my friend from Winnipeg North and for his comments and for his support. And I realize that at times in private members' bills, sometimes the wording isn't perfect. I would accept any amendments that really enhance the clarity of what we're trying to do. That we want to ensure that this is just another tool at the disposal of the courts. and that we are focusing in on the most brutal murderers that get incarcerated, the people that are so depraved and sadistic that they carry out the abduction, the sexual assault, and the ultimate killing of our innocent.